Hey Evanston, my name is Patrick Hanley and I am running to be your state senator in Springfield. I'm a progressive organizer, a small business owner, and an environmentalist. And I believe that we are in unprecedented times. I get that the stakes are high, that state government has never been so important, or that federal government could not be less trusted. And that's why I think it's so important that we turn the page now on the politics of the past, that we elect new leaders with diverse experiences, different perspectives, and that we lift our expectations for what Illinois can and should do for all of us as we build together a state that is more affordable, that is safer, that is greener, and that is growing for us, for our kids and our grandkids, no matter where you live, what you look like, what you do, or who you love. You might know me from the work we did together on Operation Swing State, in which the Democratic Party of Evanston played a vital role in sending 650 volunteers up north to knock doors in Michigan and Wisconsin. You might remember me from the Indivisible Evanston No Kings rally over the summer, or from the rapid response work that we've done in recent months, standing up to ICE agents in our communities, or as the other guy endorsed by Jan Schakowsky. Now, I first met Jan as a kid, like so many of my generation, but I got to know her a little bit better more recently when she was the godmother and the inspiration behind Operation Swing State, when myself and her team brought 80 different Democratic, labor, and progressive organizations together to mobilize 10,000 Illinois volunteers to go up and knock 250,000 doors in the 2024 election. And I draw so much inspiration from the way that Jan works with people, draws in impacted communities, fights with her convictions, stands up to power. And what Jan and I both believe is that at the heart of good progressive politics is organizing, is caring about people, is building coalitions of power, and ultimately is getting shit done. Now, I was born in Evanston but raised in Northbrook by a mom of 4 kids when my dad passed away suddenly when I was 9 years old. Because of a heroic mom and a generous community, and because of well-funded public systems of education and health and safety, we grew up with fairly normal suburban lives, and recognizing the fundamental injustice that is not afforded to all the families in our district and all the families in our state is what drives me to be a progressive and to be a Democrat. Over 20 years, I've had a diversity of experiences, from working retail and the grocery lines at Sunset Foods and the Lego store to advising state governors and state legislators during COVID-19 around public health policies. I have helped my wife grow her small business. But I've also chaired an environmental commission in my hometown. I've led an organizing and advocacy group against coal power, and I've advocated in Springfield for green policies and for governmental reform. And when I see injustice, I take action and organize, which is why in 2020, following the murder of George Floyd, I came together with local students to organize the largest rally in my hometown since Dr. King visited us in 1965. And we followed up that work around racial injustice and exclusion, working with Evanston organizers from the Justice Project or Shorefront Legacy Center to carry on that important work across our communities. All of that to say that I bring to this role the grit of an organizer, the conviction of an environmental activist, and the get stuff done attitude of a small business owner. And that's how I'm going to deliver for you in the state Senate. Do you favor an amendment to the state constitution to allow for a progressive income tax rather than the current limitation? Yes. The answer is yes. We need to get to a progressive income tax in Illinois. I worked hard on the referendum several years ago to get this passed, which ultimately failed because people didn't trust Springfield. They didn't trust the old way of doing things, and they didn't trust a Madigan-led Springfield with a variable tax rate, which is why it is so important that right now we turn the page on machine politics. We elect new, credible leaders who don't just have the policy expertise to go out with a good referendum, but the organizing experience, the conviction, and the energy to go and sell that referendum to voters. A progressive income tax is a vital way to make sure that the rich and the wealthy pay their fair share in this state and to fund all the vital programs now under threat from the federal government. Yes, emphatically. Look, Max is 2 and Jack is almost 1 year old, which means my family, my wife and I, pay more for daycare than we do on our mortgage. At a time when the cost of everything is rising, the cost of daycare is crushing working families and young parents. But this is also a justice and equity issue because so many working families aren't able to access or afford quality daycare, which keeps one spouse home, worsening the gender gap, making life worse and less fair for so many Illinoisans, and it's just not acceptable. This is like medical insurance before Obamacare, particularly as private equity closes in, buys up more and more daycares, brings down the wages of daycare workers, and undermines the quality. And look, we got to recognize also that daycare workers are woefully underpaid. This job is incredibly difficult. And so even as we expand the number of spots available to working families, we also have to protect the workers that are working at daycares and make sure that they are living lives with dignity and secure retirement. Now, Illinois has made some good strides, and Governor Pritzker has made Smart Start Illinois a core priority of his, adding some 5,800 spots to our 82,000 already publicly funded spots in the state. But there are probably 140,000 3-year-olds, something like 500,000 kids who need daycare, and we need to get to universality. Childcare and daycare is probably one of the number two policy choices that we can make to make Illinois a more attractive destination for young people. Do you favor a guaranteed minimum monthly income? So the way that I think about monthly minimum programs is as a way to get around means testing, which ultimately means that it's a justice issue. Whenever the government provides barriers between a public resource and the families who need the help, there's an opportunity for systemic racism to creep in. Means testing has been a way for the government to rip healthcare away from Black and brown families for decades. So as a way to get around that, I think minimum monthly incomes is one interesting solution. When I worked with Tony Preckwinkle in Operation Swing State, I know this is a core priority of hers in her office, and Cook County has had some promising results from their pilot program. So I'm eager to learn more about how this goes and then find opportunities to scale it at the state level. We lost 6 million votes between 2020 and 2024. How do we propose getting those Democrats back and engaged and voting for the Democratic nominee in 2028? We must show that Democrats can fight, that Democrats have a backbone, and that Democrats can deliver. We have to nominate new leaders and get past machine politics and the politics of the past. We've got to restore a politics of hard work and high expectations. And we have to show that Democratic states like Illinois are tangibly making life better for all working families, no matter where you live, who you love, or what you do. We need a progressive vision for where this country can go. We can't just fight against a government that has lost our trust and is breaking our laws. We must show voters a path towards a future where their lives are a little bit better, where they can afford health care, where they can get a good education and a career that they can rely on and believe in, that the future of the economy isn't terrifying, it is optimistic and it's inspiring. We talk a lot about historical parallels, and in this 250th of our founding year, sometimes we think about 76. Other times we think about 1860 and the incoming Civil War, but I think about 1932, at a time when fascism in this country was a real and imminent threat, but when the Democratic Party brought together a completely transformational New Deal for Americans, won political power, and reshaped our country in favor of working families and created a new political paradigm for the next generation. That's the scale of ambition that I think we need, and I think that ambition needs to start in Democratic states like Illinois. How can Democratic elected officials develop policies, processes, and plans to tangibly resist the abuses by the Trump administration of the most vulnerable persons in the Evanston community? Well, I had the opportunity to speak to a family that is targeted by ICE, and the two things that weighed most heavily on their minds were their personal safety and then the need for accountability and justice. And the state legislature and the governor created the Illinois Accountability Commission in the fall. It can now be the role of Democratic leaders in Evanston to make that real for Evanstonians. We should have a local public process where victims of abuses or their proxies or lawyers, where families of folks who've been disappeared and abducted, of volunteers who have been targeted, who have captured abuses on camera by ICE agents, can come together and can publicly share the evidence that they have gathered, enter it into a record, make sure that that record is categorized and is heard out so that either now or in the future, justice can be done. and we can hold ICE agents and federal officials accountable for the abuses that they have carried out on Evanstonians and on our community. We need a truth and reconciliation process in Evanston. But most importantly, we need to center the folks that are being impacted by these abuses. And we need to listen carefully to what they need and provide the security, the help, the accountability, the justice, and the community that will help them get through this terrible moment.